Good evening, friends. Make yourselves comfortable. Dim the lights if you want, and allow yourselves to sink a little into the atmosphere of a nighttime story. Tonight, we are going on a journey to one of the most famous and mysterious places on Earth, the Bermuda Triangle. This is a section of the Atlantic Ocean that you won't find on any official map, with unclear borders and no formal status, yet almost everyone has heard of it. People talk about it as a place where ships and planes disappear, where compasses supposedly go crazy, where radio signals vanish into the void, and where the elements suddenly break the usual laws. Over the past decades, an entire mythology has grown around this region. Books, movies, pseudo-scientific investigations, conspiracy theories, eyewitness stories, documentaries, and outright scary tales. Today, we will calmly walk through the chain of events that turned this stretch of ocean into a legend. From the first strange notes in the journals of sailors in the time of Christopher Columbus to the major catastrophes of the 20th century, like the disappearance of the massive ship USS Cyclops and the loss of 5 aircraft from Flight 19. We will touch on stories of ghost ships, mysterious lights at sea, compass malfunctions, storms and hurricanes, theories about Atlantis, UFOs, secret bases, and even the so-called electronic fog that allegedly transports planes through time. And then, we will look at what usually remains behind the scenes. Real reports from the Coast Guard and the Navy, statistics on maritime and aviation incidents, and data from insurance companies which are especially sensitive to actual, not imaginary risks. The main question running through the entire episode is very simple. Is there really something unique and inexplicable in this part of the Atlantic? Or have we ourselves turned an ordinary, though dangerous oceanic corridor into a monster, drawing a triangle on the map and collecting all the loudest stories under its shadow? If we try to answer the question, what is the Bermuda Triangle, strictly and formally, the answer will be rather boring. It is an unofficial name for a loosely defined region in the western part of the North Atlantic. It has no legally established boundaries. It is not marked as a special zone on any governmental or international nautical chart. And for navigators, it is simply ocean. Nevertheless, in popular culture, the Bermuda Triangle is usually understood as the area of ocean between 3 points: the southeastern coast of the United States, typically the region of Florida and Miami, the Bermuda Islands, and Puerto Rico. Connect these points with imaginary lines and you get the triangle. Some books draw it wider, others narrower, so its estimated size varies from roughly 500,000 to 1.5 million square miles. A difference of 1 million square miles already shows how vague this concept is. On the globe, the triangle seems small, but if you translate it into familiar scales, it turns out to be an area comparable in size to a large part of Europe. This matters because one of the busiest sea and air corridors in the world passes through it. Between the eastern coast of the U.S., the Caribbean, Central and South America, ships and planes travel constantly. The Gulf Stream, a powerful warm current, crosses this region. It can significantly shift a ship off course and rapidly spread debris or fuel slicks over a huge area, making searches much more difficult. Tropical storms and hurricanes born in the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico regularly pass through here, And beneath the surface lie the great depths of the North American basin and the nearby Puerto Rico Trench. In other words, the Bermuda Triangle combined several inconvenient factors: heavy traffic, challenging navigation, active weather, and a deep seafloor where heavy fragments of a sinking ship or aircraft disappear with almost no chance of being found. In such an environment, something is inevitably going to happen. Ships sink, planes crash, crews make mistakes, equipment fails. There is nothing mystical about it. That is the normal, if harsh, statistical reality of the sea. But the human mind is built in such a way that it prefers to see not a set of separate tragedies, but a pattern. Not somewhere in the Atlantic, but right here, inside this shape. That is why when someone later proposed drawing a triangle around this region and calling it special, the legend quickly fused with geography. A simple shape was drawn on the map, and around it one could spin any story, from strict statistics to myths about curses and portals. And one of the first stories that helped this place gain a reputation as a zone where people disappear was the legend of a ghost ship supposedly found in these waters. The story of the ship Ellen Austin is one of the most dramatic legends associated with the Bermuda Triangle, and it is almost always retold when someone wants to create a sense of mystery. The tale goes like this. The year is 1881, the Atlantic Ocean, somewhere near the Bermuda Islands. The sailing schooner Ellen Austin is heading to New York. The weather is fairly calm, visibility is good enough to watch the surroundings, and at some point the captain notices another vessel on the horizon moving strangely, or rather, hardly moving at all. It seems to be drifting, not giving any signals and not changing course. That always raises suspicion. A normal ship is either confidently following its route or clearly struggling with weather. Drifting without an obvious reason means trouble. The crew of the Ellen Austin launches boats, goes aboard the unknown vessel, and finds a classic scene straight out of a maritime ghost story. Everything is perfectly in order, except for the most important thing. The hull is intact, masts and rigging are in place, the cargo lies neatly in the hold, there is water and provisions in the cabins, nothing is looted, nothing is burned, but there is not a single person on board. No captain, no sailors, no passengers, no bodies. No signs of struggle, no blood, no traces of panic. As if everything alive simply vanished. From the standpoint of maritime law, the situation is straightforward. An abandoned vessel can be claimed as a prize and taken to port for a substantial reward. According to the legend, the captain of the Ellen Austin does exactly that. He forms a prize crew from some of his men, transfers them to the found ship, and orders both vessels to sail together toward New York. For a while, everything goes smoothly, but then a storm rises, visibility worsens, and the ships lose each other. When the Ellen Austin, as the legend says, eventually finds the prize ship again, the crew sees the same picture as the first time. The hull is intact, the cargo is untouched, but the new crew is gone. A second mysterious emptiness where moments ago there were living men. At this point, any superstitious captain would probably say, "Enough, leave it and get out." But in the developed version of the tale, the captain is stubborn and greedy. He supposedly offers a large reward to anyone willing to board the ship again. Volunteers are found, the crew is placed on the vessel once more, the ships take a common course, And then comes another dramatic detail: a thick fog. The fog becomes so dense that the ships again lose each other. When it clears, the prize ship is gone forever. It will never be seen again, and with it disappears the second crew. The story has perfect structure: a ship found 3 times and empty twice. The captain's greed, storms, fog, the repetition of an eerie mystery, all in the area of the future Bermuda Triangle. No wonder this tale wandered from book to book for decades and appeared in countless TV programs. But if we step away from the legendary storytelling and check the facts, the picture changes. The scooter Ellen Austin did exist. It is not a fictional name, and it did indeed sail the Atlantic in the late 19th century. But official maritime records, including Lloyd's archives, do not mention any unusual incidents involving it in 1881. The first known written version of the ghost ship story with the Ellen Austin appears only in 1944 in a small American newspaper, in a form that looks much more like a literary tale than an official report. Later authors added their own details. Some added a storm, others added fog, others invented dialogues between the captain and the crew. The further from the original note, the more cinematic the story became. And there is no direct evidence that such an event happened the way modern retellings describe it. However, for the creation of the Bermuda Triangle myth, this no longer mattered. The legend of an empty vessel repeatedly found floating in these waters played the role of an emotional prelude, setting the tone. Strange things can happen here, beyond normal logic. And when real ships and planes later vanished in this same region, it became much easier to label them another victim of the mysterious zone, because in the imagination of the audience, a lonely, empty ship was already drifting there. In the following chapters, we will move from almost certainly fictional maritime stories to documented tragedies, the disappearance of large ships, and the famous case of Flight 19, which became the main fuel for the myth of the Bermuda Triangle. If we put the scary tales aside and simply look at a map, the Bermuda Triangle is a conditional area in the North Atlantic located between 3 points: the coast of Florida, the Bermuda Islands, and Puerto Rico. Connect these points with imaginary lines and you get the familiar triangle. Inside it lies part of the Sargasso Sea with its thick carpets of seaweed. These are the very waters Christopher Columbus sailed through when he described strange compass behavior and a mysterious light on the horizon in his journal. The western boundary of the triangle is crossed by the powerful warm current of the Gulf Stream. It can drag a ship that doesn't account for it dozens or even hundreds of kilometers off its planned route in a single day, and can spread debris or oil slicks from a disaster across a huge area, or scatter them so widely that finding them becomes extremely difficult. This is one of the reasons why many search operations in this region ended with nothing even in the 20th century, when radar and reconnaissance aircraft already existed. Another important factor is weather. The triangle lies in a zone regularly hit by tropical storms and hurricanes forming in the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico. What we see in the news as devastated coasts of Florida and nearby islands is exactly the aftermath of the atmospheric monsters that pass through this region. And a third factor is depth. This area includes part of the North American basin, where depths exceed 5,000 meters, and nearby lies the Puerto Rico Trench, where the seafloor drops almost 8.5 kilometers. If a ship or aircraft sinks in such a place, heavy parts fall into eternal darkness under enormous pressure, where, until the invention of deep diving equipment, humanity had no way to explore anything. The result is not a magical triangle, but a large and objectively difficult region for navigation. Heavy maritime and air traffic, strong currents, unpredictable weather, and great depths. It is a dangerous area, but for entirely understandable reasons. Here, the ocean truly punishes mistakes and quickly hides evidence. Everything else is a matter of how people chose to tell this story. For a long time, all incidents in this region were perceived simply as part of the general harsh statistics of the ocean. A ship disappeared, another was caught in a storm, someone recorded strange lights or compass malfunctions in a logbook. These stories existed separately in official reports, newspaper articles, U.S. Navy documents, and sailors' tales, and no one linked them into a single cursed zone. The first attempts to combine these unrelated incidents began in the mid-20th century, and this happened long before the term Bermuda Triangle was coined. In 1950, journalist Edward Jones published a piece for the Associated Press in which he drew attention to a zone of disappearances near Bermuda. He did not use any geometric term, but he already wrote about a stretch of ocean where ships seem to vanish without explanation. 2 years later, in 1952, writer George Xavier Sand published an article in Fate magazine where he collected several mysterious incidents and for the first time described this region as a triangle, although the term did not yet gain widespread adoption. But everything changed when someone appeared who suggested seeing a unified pattern in these scattered episodes. That person was Vincent Hayes Gaddis, a journalist, writer, and enthusiast of all things mysterious. In February 1964, he published an article in the popular magazine Argosy titled "The Deadly Bermuda Triangle." Gaddis was the first to suggest that readers connect Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico with lines to form a triangle, and claimed that within this shape there was an unusually high number of disappearances. To support his idea, he listed several real but very loosely interpreted cases, including the disappearance of the USS Cyclops in March 1918, the loss of the brig sloop USS Pickering in 1800, the disappearance of the armed schooner USS Wildcat in 1824, and other tragedies, some of which indeed occurred somewhere in the Atlantic region, but not necessarily within the imaginary triangle he drew. Gaddis's key technique was simple. He ignored the real causes of these disasters: storms, overloading, lack of modern communication systems, navigational errors, and focused on mystery. Ships and planes, he claimed, vanished without a trace, disappeared in clear weather, sent no distress signals, even when archival documents said otherwise. But the true global boost to the myth was given by Charles Frambad Berlitz. In 1974, he published the book The Bermuda Triangle, in which he took Gaddis's ideas, added many poorly verified and often unreliable stories, and tied everything to topics that had fascinated him for years: Atlantis, mysterious ancient civilizations, and underwater structures of unknown origin. In Berlitz's interpretation, the disappearances of ships and planes were explained not by real maritime conditions, but by the influence of some anomalous force, perhaps remnants of Atlantean technology, underwater energy structures, or secret government experiments. The book became a global bestseller, selling more than 20 million copies in dozens of languages, and turned the Bermuda Triangle into a worldwide cultural symbol, a kind of brand of mystery. It is important to understand the historical moment. The 1960s, 1970s were an era of the Cold War, nuclear anxiety, a boom in interest in UFOs, searches for Atlantis, pyramid energy, and paranormal phenomena. Against the backdrop of rapid scientific progress, space exploration, deep-sea research, studies of Earth's magnetism, people were especially fascinated by areas where answers were unclear. That is why the idea of a specific part of the ocean where the laws of nature break down became incredibly appealing to the mass audience. As a result, real tragedies, lost ships, missing crews, aircraft gone in stormy Atlantic waters became intertwined with Vincent Hayes Gaddis's journalistic approach and Charles Frambach Berlitz's fantasies. And from that moment on, when someone said Bermuda Triangle, they meant not so much a geographical region as an entire cultural myth. Danger, mystery, the unknown, a place where anything seemed possible, from magnetic traps and ancient civilizations to aliens and parallel dimensions. After Berlitz's book exploded in popularity, the Bermuda Triangle ceased to be a niche topic for mystery enthusiasts and fully entered mainstream culture. American TV channels produced documentaries featuring ominous narration and dark music. Newspapers and magazines published articles with dramatic headlines like "The Mystery Science Cannot Explain." And artists drew the same recognizable image, a triangle on a map, and in the background, a sinking ship or a plane disappearing into clouds. Any major tragedy in the Western Atlantic was immediately framed as another victim of the Bermuda Triangle, even if it later turned out that the incident occurred far outside its supposed boundaries or had completely ordinary causes, a storm, old equipment, overloading. Cinema picked up the wave instantly. In science fiction films, the triangle became a place where secret experiments with space and time were conducted, a portal to other dimensions, or a point through which aliens abducted people and equipment. In one of the most famous films about extraterrestrial contact, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the missing Flight 19 squadron appears in the desert, a transparent hint that they were supposedly taken and returned by someone not from this world. Musicians used the phrase Bermuda Triangle as a metaphor for something dangerous, pulling, inexplicable. Board games appeared where players had to guide ships through an anomalous zone without letting them disappear. Children's books featured illustrations of dark seas and a triangle on the map. Popular magazines regularly published collections like The 10 Most Mysterious Disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle. Gradually, the name no longer needed explanation. Saying Bermuda Triangle instantly evoked a fixed set of images: danger, disappearances, malfunctioning instruments, and the helplessness of science. Real oceanographic facts and statistics were overshadowed by these images. Few cared how many ships passed through this region safely or how many flights landed normally. What mattered was the legend of a place where the rules break. In this sense, the Bermuda Triangle became as much a cultural icon as vampires, ghosts, or flying saucers. Each of these themes has real historical roots, but in popular imagination, they live their own independent life. And when we begin examining real cases today, ship disappearances, plane crashes, stories of strange lights and electronic fog, it is crucial to keep this duality in mind. There are real incidents with real people and real dates, and there is a mythological shell layered over them for decades, giving them a supernatural meaning. In the next chapters, we will move on to those specific episodes, the disappearances of ships and the tragedy of Flight 19, and try to carefully separate fact from the legendary shell that mass culture wrapped around them for generations. When the legend of the Bermuda Triangle first began to take shape, dozens of real ship disappearances were absorbed into it. Although many of these incidents occurred long before the term Bermuda Triangle existed, later they were woven into the narrative as if they all confirmed the existence of a mysterious zone. In reality, the situation was far more complicated. The earliest episodes that historians associate with this region date back to the 19th century. In 1800, the ship USS Pickering, an American brig sloop headed to the West Indies, disappeared somewhere between the Caribbean Sea and the Bermuda Islands. At the time, the region was in the midst of the so-called quasi-war, an undeclared naval conflict involving France, the United States, and Great Britain. Because of this, the loss of the Pickering could have been caused by storms, pirates, French privateers, or a simple navigational error. But a century later, its disappearance was retroactively tied to the mysterious forces of the Triangle. In 1824, another vessel vanished, the USS Wildcat, a small American schooner en route from the Bahamas to Florida. It disappeared without a trace. These cases were unremarkable among the dozens of similar tragedies in the Atlantic, but when the Bermuda Triangle became a media phenomenon, amateur historians added both ships to the list of alleged victims of the anomaly. This is how isolated incidents began merging into a single legend. By the late 19th century, more and more reports appeared about ships that left port and never returned. Sometimes they sank in storms. Sometimes they disappeared too quickly to send a distress signal. Sometimes they were found drifting without crews. And such cases became perfect story material for building mystique. But it is important to understand that in the 19th century, there was no radio communication, no satellites, no modern rescue services. Sailing into the open ocean meant losing contact with the world for weeks. Storms, wreckage, strong currents, everything could erase evidence quickly. That is why nearly every tragedy in this region eventually ended up on the growing list of disappearances, even if it occurred far outside the informal boundaries of the Triangle. Many of these stories contain nothing supernatural, yet they later became the foundation for books and television programs. But one case stood out sharply from the rest, so massive and dramatic that it was the first to make many people view this region not just as a dangerous part of the ocean, but as a potentially anomalous zone. That case was the disappearance of the USS Cyclops. On March 4, 1918, one of the largest transport ships of the United States Navy left the port of Bridgetown in Barbados, bound for Baltimore, and vanished without a trace. This was the USS Cyclops, AC-4, a massive collier measuring 165 meters in length, carrying more than 10,800 tons of manganese ore and 306 people on board. It was not a combat vessel, but it played a crucial role in supplying American industry with strategic materials during World War I. The ship was equipped with a wireless Morse telegraph, meaning the Cyclops could have sent a distress signal. But it never sent a single message after departing Barbados. This is what created the central mystery. The disappearance was instantaneous. No warnings, no reports of damage, no hint of an attack. The overloading of the ship was known even in port. With a carrying capacity of about 8,000 tons, it was transporting more than 10,000 tons of ore, and the port authorities in Barbados explicitly warned the captain that the ship was sitting too low in the water. Weather conditions in the region were worsening, and storms were likely. Despite this, the first suspicions fell on a German submarine, a natural assumption during wartime. But later, the German Admiralty officially stated that no U-boat had attacked the Cyclops. This is important because German forces readily confirmed their wartime sinkings even years afterward, and denying responsibility was extremely unusual. More theories followed. A manganese explosion, structural failure, engine problems, overloading, a sudden list, a storm, but none of them became definitive. No debris, no lifeboats, no bodies were ever found. A famous phrase is often quoted, "Only God and the sea know what happened to this ship." But it was not President Woodrow Wilson who said it, as many claim. The words actually belong to Josephus Daniels, the United States Secretary of the Navy. Yet the most astonishing part came much later. In 1941, both sister ships of the Cyclops, the USS Proteus and the USS Nereus, also disappeared. Both were sailing along similar routes, both were carrying heavy cargo, bauxite, and both vanished without a trace in the same broad region of the Atlantic. Neither ship sent a distress signal. 3 enormous vessels, 3 disappearances, 0 wreckage found. The same waters. It is no surprise that the cases of the Cyclops, Proteus, and Nereus became the foundation for the legend of a ship-devouring triangle. But a closer examination paints a much more realistic picture. All 3 vessels were overloaded, aging, poorly suited for storm-prone routes, were traveling through the unpredictable currents of the Gulf Stream, and had limited ability to maintain reliable communication under extreme conditions. Meanwhile, early 20th century search operations were far too limited to produce reliable results. Even so, the disappearance of the Cyclops became the first story in which the phrase, "the ship vanished as if dissolved," appeared seriously, and this image became permanently embedded in the mythology of the triangle. And ahead lay the tragedy that made this zone world famous, the disappearance of Flight 19. On December 5, 1945, a group of 5 Grumman TBM Avenger torpedo bombers took off from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale in Florida. It was meant to be a routine training flight. The pilots were supposed to follow a simple triangular route over the Atlantic, drop practice bombs, and return to base. Almost all of them were experienced veterans of World War II. The group was led by Lieutenant Charles Taylor, a pilot with more than 2,500 hours of flight time, who had recently been transferred from another base. The weather at the beginning of the flight was good, visibility was clear, and all the aircraft were in perfect working condition. Nothing hinted at trouble. But about an hour and a half after takeoff, things suddenly changed. According to the surviving radio messages, Taylor reported that both of his compasses had failed and he was not sure where they were. He mistakenly believed they were flying over the Florida Keys, when in reality, the group was somewhere over the Bahamas. That mistake became critical. Heading north pushed them farther out into the open ocean. Several wingmen tried to convince Taylor to change course. One pilot can be heard in the transcripts practically pleading to turn west, warning that if they kept going east, they would end up lost over the Atlantic. But discipline is discipline. No one dared take command away from Taylor. The weather worsened. Radio communications became weaker. The base only heard scattered fragments. "We can't determine our position. We seem to be heading east. Everything looks strange." Some of the transcribed quotes, repeated in later retellings, like "we're entering whitewater," do not appear in the official transcripts. But even without that, the situation was chaotic. By 7 p.m., the planes were almost out of fuel. The radio fell silent. The 5 Avengers disappeared over the ocean, and no one ever saw them again. 20 minutes later, a PBM-5 Mariner rescue seaplane with 13 crew members was dispatched to search for them. It, too, vanished. Hours later, the crew of the steamship SS Gaines Mills reported seeing a massive explosion in the sky and smelling gasoline fumes. Mariners had a reputation for fuel leaks, and a spark could cause an explosion, so the disappearance of the rescue plane was most likely unrelated to Flight 19. Still, the legend was already formed. 6 aircraft disappeared in the same region on the same evening. The U.S. Navy launched one of the largest search operations in its history. More than 300 aircraft and ships searched the area for 5 days. They found nothing. No debris, no bodies, no oil slicks, just endless ocean. The story soon entered pop culture. In Steven Spielberg's film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the planes of Flight 19 reappear in the desert, untouched, a clear nod to extraterrestrial involvement. But official investigations painted a more realistic picture. The most likely causes of the tragedy were a combination of navigational error, worsening weather, instrument failure, and Charles Taylor's complete disorientation. He had already been forced to ditch planes twice because of navigation mistakes. He did not know the area, had only recently arrived at the base, was late for the briefing, and seemed tense. When things began to go wrong, he made a chain of incorrect decisions. Still, the disappearance of 5 planes, and then a 6th without a trace, was too dramatic for people to accept as a simple training accident. For many, it became proof that something in these waters was truly mysterious. And that is how a real tragedy became one of the strongest pillars supporting the myth of the Bermuda Triangle. As the myth of the Bermuda Triangle spread around the world, people began looking for explanations that were grander than storms or navigational errors. And almost immediately, one of the oldest legends of human history resurfaced: Atlantis. The idea that an ancient advanced civilization might be buried somewhere beneath the Atlantic Ocean was already captivating on its own. So it's no surprise that many authors tried to link the triangle's disappearances to supposed Atlantean technology. One of the strongest advocates of this idea was Charles Berlitz, whose best-selling book helped turn the triangle into a global sensation. Berlitz suggested that Atlantis had once existed somewhere in this part of the ocean, and that its destruction might have left behind strange energy fields or underwater structures that could disrupt navigation. These theories had no scientific evidence behind them, but the idea was so fascinating that it became deeply rooted in popular culture. In 1968, the legend gained new momentum when divers near Bimini discovered a long row of large stone blocks. Newspapers quickly labeled it the Bimini Road and claimed it was the remnant of an ancient civilization, possibly even Atlantis. Photos of neat stone slabs laid out in rows fueled excitement. Geologists, however, soon concluded that the formation was natural, created by erosion of limestone. But the myth had already taken off. Then, in the 1990s, tabloids published an even more dramatic story. A supposed oceanographer claimed he had discovered two giant glass pyramids on the seafloor inside the Bermuda Triangle. According to the reports, they were 150 meters tall and perfectly preserved. The story spread worldwide until researchers discovered that the scientists named in the articles had never existed, and that the original report came from a sensationalist newspaper known for publishing hoaxes. Later versions embellished the tale even more, saying that the pyramids had been discovered back in the 1970s, but that governments suppressed the truth to hide the secret of Atlantis. In the early 2000s, rumors surfaced again, this time about an underwater city near the coast of Cuba. A few sonar images did reveal unusual shapes on the seafloor, but later studies showed that the formations could be explained naturally. No actual ruins were ever confirmed. So why did Atlantis become such a persistent part of the Bermuda Triangle story? Because it offers the kind of explanation people want. A ship sinking in a storm is tragic, but a massive vessel disappearing because of ancient technology buried deep beneath the ocean, that is dramatic, cinematic, unforgettable. The myth of Atlantis and the myth of the Bermuda Triangle fit together perfectly. And as long as people seek grand, mysterious explanations, Atlantis will always find a place in the story. But when the allure of mystery is stripped away, Atlantis disappears from the narrative just as quickly as the ships themselves, leaving only natural formations and humanity's endless desire to find secrets where none exist. One of the most popular scientific-sounding explanations for the Bermuda Triangle is the idea of a magnetic anomaly. Countless articles from the mid-20th century claimed that compasses in this region supposedly behave strangely, pointing toward true north instead of magnetic north, or spinning unpredictably. The origin of this theory comes from two incidents that later became part of the triangle's mythology. The first was an entry made in Christopher Columbus's journal in 1492, where he noted slight deviations in his ship's compass. The second was the tragedy of Flight 19, when the group's commander reported that his compasses had stopped working. These two stories fit perfectly into the narrative of a magnetic triangle. In reality, Earth has two different north points: geographic north, which marks the planet's axis of rotation, and magnetic north, which affects compass readings. The difference between them is called magnetic declination. There is also an agonic line, a line where magnetic north and true north coincide. This line really did pass through the region of the Bermuda Triangle in the 18th and 19th centuries, but it has long since moved, drifting westward at a rate of about 0.2 degrees per year. Today, it is closer to the Gulf of Mexico. That means compasses in the Bermuda Triangle work completely normally. Even if a magnetic anomaly had existed there, skilled navigators have always adjusted for magnetic declination when setting their course. The broken compass in Flight 19 was far more likely a result of poor equipment condition, pilot error, and Charles Taylor's disorientation rather than some mysterious force. Still, the magnetic theory survived because it sounds scientific and easily explains confusion. A pilot loses his course, a compass error must be the cause. A ship drifts in the wrong direction, the compass went crazy. However, all modern data fully disproves this version. The Bermuda Triangle shows no abnormal magnetic activity, and no navigation authority in the world considers it dangerous in this regard. Even so, the theory remained popular in books and films for decades because it offers the perfect blend, a touch of science mixed with mystery, and plenty of room for dramatic storytelling. The truth is simpler and far less theatrical. Once the more romantic and mystical theories, like Atlantis, began losing their appeal, attention shifted to real, natural phenomena. The first of these was the concept of rogue waves, rare, massive waves that can reach heights of 25 to 30 meters. Unlike tsunamis, rogue waves are not caused by earthquakes and do not follow predictable patterns. They appear suddenly, formed by the chaotic interference of wave systems, and they are powerful enough to split large ships in half. In 1995, one such wave, the famous Dropner wave, was recorded for the first time by scientific equipment in the North Sea. That moment finally proved that these giants are real, not just sailors' tales. The Atlantic Ocean is one of the regions where rogue waves occur most frequently, especially in areas where strong currents collide with high winds. The Gulf Stream, which flows directly through the Bermuda Triangle, is an ideal environment for these waves to form. Because of this, rogue waves may very well have been responsible for some ship disappearances, particularly in the 19th and early 20th centuries, when vessels were far less sturdy than modern ones. The second phenomenon often discussed is methane gas eruptions. Massive deposits of methane hydrates do exist on the ocean floor. Under certain conditions, these hydrates can break apart, releasing enormous bubbles of gas into the water. Such a bubble could reduce the density of the water beneath a ship, causing it to lose buoyancy and sink rapidly. Theoretically, this is possible. In 2016, researchers in Norway discovered huge craters on the floor of the Barents Sea, likely created by methane explosions in the distant past. Based on this, some scientists speculated that similar events might happen in the Atlantic. But there is no proof of this. No confirmed shipwreck in the Bermuda Triangle has ever been linked to methane gas. Still, the theory remains popular because it paints a cinematic picture. A ship sails normally, then suddenly a massive bubble rises, the vessel drops into it, and everything disappears without a trace. In reality, such methane releases are extremely rare and occur only under specific geological conditions, which are unlikely in the Western Atlantic. But just like rogue waves, the idea sounds scientific enough to make it into documentaries and TV shows. Both explanations, rogue waves and methane bubbles are real phenomena, but neither is required to explain the vast majority of incidents in the Bermuda Triangle. Weather, currents, human error, and the sheer depth of the ocean already account for almost everything. When the Bermuda Triangle became a worldwide sensation in the 1960s and 1970s, one of the first theories to gain massive popularity was the idea of extraterrestrial involvement. At that time, UFO hysteria in the United States was at an all-time high. Dozens of magazines published stories about aliens, radio shows discussed sightings of flying discs, and movies and television programs fueled the growing fascination. In that cultural atmosphere, the idea that the Bermuda Triangle might be a kind of cosmic corridor where aliens abduct ships and planes suddenly seemed convincing to a huge number of people. The theory became even more popular after writer Charles Berlitz suggested in his book that extraterrestrial beings might have an underwater base somewhere between Bermuda and Florida. He pointed to disappearances that happened without distress signals and claimed that perhaps ships were simply switched off and taken away by unknown forces. Many so-called eyewitnesses told stories about strange lights over the ocean, fast-moving shadows, and deserted ships found with no signs of struggle or panic. These accounts fit perfectly into a dramatic narrative: humans being observed by extraterrestrials, and the triangle serving as their hunting ground. Of course, there has never been any scientific evidence supporting alien involvement. No unusual energy traces, no strange materials, no confirmed objects that could explain disappearances, nothing at all. Yet, the theory persisted because it was simply too exciting to abandon. After all, if a ship sinks in a hurricane, that is tragic but ordinary. If a ship vanishes because of aliens, that becomes a story people want to hear. The idea grew even stronger after the release of Steven Spielberg's film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where the planes of Flight 19 appear intact in the desert as if returned by extraterrestrials. Scenes like that helped cement the idea that perhaps the triangle was connected to something otherworldly. In reality, none of the disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle contain any evidence of extraterrestrial interference. But the UFO theory continues to live on for one simple reason: as long as people enjoy dramatic explanations, they will always choose the extraordinary over the ordinary. Among all the legends tied to the Bermuda Triangle, one story stands out more strongly than almost any other: the account of American pilot Bruce Gernon. Unlike most storytellers, Gernon claimed not only to have survived an anomalous event, but also to have documented his experience in detail. His story became almost as iconic as the disappearance of Flight 19. On December 4, 1970, Gernon took off from Andros Island in the Bahamas with his father in a small single-engine A-36 Bonanza. The weather at the start of the flight was perfect, but soon he saw a strange cloud on the horizon that grew rapidly in size. He tried to fly around it, but the cloud expanded so quickly that it blocked every possible path. Gernon decided to fly straight through it. Inside, everything was calm: no rain, no turbulence, no wind. Then he noticed flashes of light like static electricity discharging around the aircraft. Suddenly, the cloud formed a massive tunnel, a cylindrical corridor of swirling vapor surrounding the plane. Gernon said they flew through this tunnel for about 30 seconds, though it felt much longer. His instruments began acting strangely. The compass spun in random directions, the airspeed didn't match the plane's actual movement, and the radio signal faded in and out. At the end of the tunnel was a bright light, and when the plane finally broke through, it entered a thick white mist, a dense fog where visibility was nearly zero. When radio contact finally returned, the air traffic controller told Gernon that his plane was already near Miami. According to Gernon's calculations, they still had around 90 minutes of flight remaining. Somehow, they had crossed a distance that normally took an hour and a half in just 47 minutes. Even more strangely, the fuel consumption matched the shorter duration, and the cockpit clock showed less time than expected. Gernon later called the phenomenon electronic fog, an atmospheric anomaly capable of distorting perception, interfering with instruments, and even compressing distances. Some researchers tried to explain the event by pointing to solar activity. That day, more than 80 sunspots were recorded, and the solar wind was unusually strong, which could have affected the Earth's magnetic field and created rare atmospheric disturbances. But none of these theories fully explained the missing hour of flight or the sudden change in the plane's position. Skeptics point out that small aircraft frequently encounter turbulence, unusual cloud formations, and temporary instrument errors, especially around storm systems. But Gernon's case stands out because he was an experienced pilot, kept records, and consistently insisted throughout his life that he did not believe in the supernatural, only that he had encountered a rare natural phenomenon that science has not yet explained. His story became one of the most frequently cited accounts in Bermuda Triangle literature. It does not prove time distortion or otherworldly forces, but it does show that unusual atmospheric conditions can completely disorient even experienced pilots. And such conditions may well have been behind many disappearances later attributed to supernatural causes. By the 1980s and 1990s, so many theories had accumulated around the Bermuda Triangle that eventually someone needed to take a cold, systematic look at all the evidence. That person was Larry Kushi, a librarian, amateur pilot, and arguably the most rational researcher in the history of the topic. In 1975, he published his book, The Bermuda Triangle Mystery, Solved, which became the first serious attempt to dismantle the Triangle's myths piece by piece. Kushi did what no one had bothered to do for decades. He took the full list of alleged disappearances and checked each one carefully. He dug through U.S. Coast Guard archives, Navy reports, Lloyd's Register documents, newspapers from the 19th and 20th centuries, accident records, insurance data, and reconstructed accurate accounts of what had actually happened. The results were devastating for the legend. Kushi discovered that many popular stories were either distorted, greatly exaggerated, or had no documented evidence at all. For example, the story of the ship Ellen Austin, with its 2 vanished prize crews, appeared only in a dramatic newspaper article from the 1940s, almost 60 years after the voyage, and had no basis in official maritime records. According to Lloyd's Register, The ship's 1881 journey was completely uneventful. No drifting vessel, no missing crews, no mysterious fog. Many of the early 19th century disappearances that authors retroactively placed in the triangle happened nowhere near the region's supposed boundaries and occurred during a period when the Atlantic was full of pirates, colonial conflicts, and frequent hurricanes. Upon review, it became clear that almost all of these tragedies had perfectly normal explanations. But Cauchy's most important finding came from his statistical analysis. He showed that the accident rate in the area associated with the Bermuda Triangle is no higher than anywhere else in the world. It is a stormy part of the ocean with complicated navigation, strong Gulf Stream currents, and frequent tropical storms, but the same is true for other busy regions of the Atlantic. The myth persisted only because writers and TV shows cherry-picked rare, dramatic cases and presented them as evidence of a supernatural pattern, ignoring thousands of ordinary, well-documented incidents. Later, researchers from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, confirmed Cauchy's conclusions. There are no unusual forces at work in the Bermuda Triangle. No natural phenomena capable of swallowing ships or destroying aircraft have ever been found. It is simply a normal part of the ocean with normal risks. In the 2000s, the topic resurfaced again thanks to modern investigative journalism on YouTube. One of the most popular investigations was by Johnny Harris, who obtained access to a global database of maritime accidents. His findings were astonishing. In 2021, almost 9,000 ships passed through the so-called triangle, and only 2 were involved in any kind of incident. That is about 0.02%, far lower than the global average. By that point, the legend of the Bermuda Triangle had essentially collapsed. And yet, the myth continues to live. Why? Because people would much rather hear about mysteries than about statistics. We want to believe that somewhere on the map there is a place that defies logic, a zone where the rules of nature break down. But the truth is much more ordinary, and in a way, much more beautiful. The Bermuda Triangle is not a portal, not a trap, not the grave of Atlantis, not an alien base, and not a hotspot of unknown forces. It is simply a part of the ocean, deep, complicated, unpredictable, sometimes dangerous, but entirely real. The only reason millions of people know its name is because of our timeless love for mysteries and spectacular stories. Thank you so much for watching our video and supporting the channel. See you in the next episodes, and good night.